I never thought a porch swing would become the hill I was willing to die on. But here I was, standing in my front yard at 6 in the morning, staring at a bright orange citation taped to my front door while my neighbor watched from across the street with her arms crossed and a satisfied expression plastered across her face. My name is Frank Emerson, and I had just moved into the Meadowbrook Glen subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 months ago. The house was perfect, a beautiful 2-story craftsman with a wraparound porch that I'd fallen in love with the moment I saw it. The first thing I did after moving in was install a gorgeous wooden porch swing I'd ordered from a premium outdoor furniture company. The thing had cost me nearly $800, was made from weather-resistant cedar, and according to the manufacturer, was rated to hold 1,000 pounds. I'd mounted it myself, using heavy-duty eye bolts anchored into the solid beam overhead, following the installation instructions to the letter. That swing had become my sanctuary. Every morning, I'd sit out there with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Arizona sky in shades of pink and orange. Every evening, I'd unwind there after work, sometimes raiding, sometimes just enjoying the desert breeze. It was perfect, or at least, it had been until this morning. The citation was printed on official-looking letterhead from the Meadowbrook Glen Homeowners Association. In bold letters across the top, it read, "Violation Notice." My hands shook slightly as I pulled it off the door and read through the details. "Dear resident," it began in that fake polite tone that only HOA correspondents seem to master. "It has come to the attention of the Meadowbrook Glen HOA board that you have installed an unapproved porch swing at your residence located at 4172 Desert Bloom Drive. Per Section 7.3.2 of the Community Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, all external modifications and additions must receive prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Furthermore, the aforementioned swing poses a significant safety concern for residents and visitors. You are hereby ordered to remove the swing within 72 hours or face daily fines of $100 until compliance is achieved. For questions, please contact HOA President Patricia Whitmore. I read it twice, then a third time, certain I must be missing something. A safety concern. The swing was professionally manufactured, properly installed, and hadn't caused a single problem in the 3 months it had been hanging there. I'd had friends over, we'd sat on it together, and it hadn't so much as creaked under the weight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my buddy Derek, texting to confirm our plans for later that week. I ignored it for the moment and instead pulled up my contacts, scrolling until I found the number I'd saved when I first moved in. Patricia Whitmore, HOA President. I'd met her briefly during the move in orientation. A thin woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair styled in what I could only describe as a speak-to-the-manager cut. She'd seemed pleasant enough then, though there had been something in her eyes that should have warned me. I called the number. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Patricia Whitmore speaking. Her voice was clipped and professional. "Hi, Patricia. This is Frank Emerson from Desert Bloom Drive. I just found a citation on my door about my porch swing, and I think there might be some kind of mistake." There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "No mistake, Mr. Emerson. The swing is a violation and a safety hazard. It needs to be removed." "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. What safety hazard?" "The swing is rated by the manufacturer to hold 1,000 pounds. I installed it correctly using the proper hardware. It's completely safe." "That may be what the manufacturer claims, Mr. Emerson, but the HOA has a responsibility to all residents of Meadowbrook Glen. What if a child were to fall from the swing? What if the chain broke and someone was injured? We simply cannot allow such liability on the property. My jaw clenched. With all due respect, that's ridiculous. By that logic, you'd have to ban stairs because someone might fall down them, or driveways because someone might trip. The swing is safe. I have all the documentation proving its weight capacity and safety ratings. The decision has been made, Mr. Emerson. You have 72 hours to remove the swing or the fines will begin. Have a nice day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there on my porch, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. This couldn't be legal. It had to violate some kind of property rights or reasonable use laws. I went inside and immediately opened my laptop, pulling up the HOA documents I'd been given when I purchased the house. I'd skimmed them at the time, more focused on the house itself than on the fine print of community regulations. That was looking like a mistake now. Section 7.3.2 did indeed exist, and it did say that external modifications required approval. However, there was a subsection that listed exceptions for common residential fixtures and furnishings, including but not limited to porch furniture, seasonal decorations within specified guidelines, and standard outdoor equipment. A porch swing seemed to fall squarely into that category. I spent the next hour digging through Arizona HOA laws and found several relevant statutes. Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16 governed planned communities and HOAs. From what I could tell, HOAs had broad authority but weren't unlimited. They couldn't enforce rules that were arbitrary, capricious, or selectively applied. More importantly, they had to follow their own governing documents. Armed with this information, I drafted a formal response letter to the HOA. I cited the exception clause in their own documents, provided the manufacturer's specifications and safety ratings for the swing, included photos of the professional installation, and requested that the violation notice be rescinded. I sent it via certified mail to ensure there would be a record of delivery. 3 days passed. No response from the HOA, but also no one came to check if I'd removed the swing. I continued my morning and evening routine, enjoying my coffee and my books on the swing, half expecting someone to show up at any moment demanding compliance. On the 4th day, I received a response. Not a letter, but another citation taped to my door when I came home from work. This one informed me that I was now being fined $100 per day for non-compliance, starting from that morning. The math was simple and infuriating. I was already $700 in the hole according to their accounting. That evening, I drove to the address listed on the HOA letterhead. It was a small office complex about 2 miles from my neighborhood, one of those generic professional buildings with mirrored windows and a parking lot that was mostly empty at 6 in the evening. The directory in the lobby listed the Meadowbrook Glen HOA office as Suite 214. The door was locked when I tried the handle, but I could see lights on inside through the frosted glass. I knocked firmly. After a moment, the door opened, and Patricia Whitmore stood there, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Mr. Emerson, this is irregular. If you need to communicate with the HOA, please do so in writing during business hours." I did communicate in writing. I sent a detailed letter explaining why the violation notice is incorrect and providing documentation about the swing's safety. I haven't received any response except another fine. She sighed like I was a particularly difficult child. "Your letter was reviewed by the board. The decision stands. The swing is a liability, and it must be removed. Your opinion on the matter, while noted, is not relevant to the board's determination. Can I at least appear before the board, present my case in person? The CC and Articus say homeowners have the right to address the board regarding disputes. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. You can submit a request to be added to the agenda. In the meantime, the fines continue to accrue. I suggest you simply remove the swing and avoid further penalties. 3 weeks of fines would be over $2,000. That's not reasonable, and you know it. Then remove the swing, Mr. Emerson. This isn't complicated. She started to close the door. I put my hand up to stop it, though I didn't touch the door itself. Why are you doing this? The swing isn't hurting anyone. It's safe, it's not an eyesore, and it's not affecting property values. What's the real issue here? For just a moment, something flickered in her expression. Anger, maybe, or satisfaction. The issue is that you didn't follow the rules. Everyone else in this community manages to submit approval requests before making modifications. You simply installed whatever you wanted without regard for the process. That kind of attitude undermines the entire purpose of having an HOA. I reviewed the documents. Porch furniture is specifically exempted from the approval process. Your interpretation differs from the board's. The board's interpretation is what matters. Good evening, Mr. Emerson. This time she did close the door, and I heard the lock click into place. I stood there for a moment, anger boiling in my chest, before I turned and walked back to my truck. Over the next 2 weeks, I did everything I could think of. I consulted with a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Victoria Lewis, and her office was in downtown Scottsdale. She was probably in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense in a way that immediately put me at ease. HOA cases are tricky, she told me during our first consultation. Arizona law gives HOAs significant authority, but they're not dictators. If they're violating their own governing documents or applying rules inconsistently, we have grounds to fight this. So what are our options? She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her desk. First, we document everything. Every communication, every fine notice, every interaction. Second, we look for inconsistencies in enforcement. If other homeowners have porch furniture that wasn't pre-approved, that helps your case. Third, we prepare for the board meeting and make your case as strongly as possible. If that doesn't work, we can file a lawsuit, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming. How expensive are we talking? Could be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, depending on how long it drags out and whether it goes to trial. Most of these cases settle before trial, but there are no guarantees. I left her office feeling both encouraged and overwhelmed. $20,000 to defend my right to have a porch swing seemed insane, but I was already in this deep. The fines were accumulating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just a swing. That weekend, I walked around my neighborhood with my phone, taking photos. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The house 3 doors down from mine had an elaborate porch setup with a hanging bench, decorative planters, and string lights. 2 streets over, someone had installed a large wooden pergola over their patio. Another house had a fountain feature in their front yard. All of these were arguably more significant modifications than my simple swing, and I was willing to bet none of them had gone through an approval process. I compiled the photos and sent them to Victoria. She responded quickly. Perfect. This is exactly what we need. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at 7. I arrived at 6:45, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, carrying a folder with all my documentation. The meeting was held in a conference room at the same office complex where I'd confronted Patricia weeks earlier. The room was set up with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat. including Patricia in the center. Folding chairs were arranged in rows for residents, though only about a dozen people were in attendance. I recognized a few faces from the neighborhood. Patricia called the meeting to order with practiced efficiency, running through standard business, budget updates, upcoming community events, maintenance schedules. I waded through nearly 45 minutes of mundane discussion before my item finally came up on the agenda. Next, we have Frank Emerson, who wishes to address the board regarding a violation notice. Mr. Emerson, you have 5 minutes. I stood and walked to the front of the room, suddenly aware of how quiet everyone had become. Thank you. I'm here to contest the violation notice regarding the porch swing at my residence. I believe the notice is incorrect for several reasons. I laid out my case methodically. The exception clause in the CC and Articus for porch furniture. The manufacturer specifications showing the swing's safety rating. Photos of the professional installation. And finally, the photos of other properties in the neighborhood with similar or more significant modifications that hadn't required pre-approval. Patricia's expression remained neutral throughout my presentation, but I noticed a couple of the other board members shifting uncomfortably when I showed the photos of other properties. "Are you finished, Mr. Emerson?" Patricia asked when I paused. "Yes, that's everything. Thank you. The board will take your information under advisement. You'll receive our decision in writing within 10 business days." "Wait, that's it. Don't I get to hear your discussion or ask questions? Board deliberations are conducted in executive session. You're welcome to wait for the written response." I felt my face flush with frustration. With all due respect, I've already been waiting for weeks while fines accumulate. The least you could do is tell me what specific safety concern you have with the swing. What is the actual hazard? Patricia set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Mr. Emerson, the board has a duty to exercise reasonable judgment in protecting the community. We don't need to prove that something is dangerous, only that it poses a potential risk that could result in liability for the HOA. But that standard is so broad it's meaningless. Everything poses some potential risk. Where's the line?" One of the other board members, a man in his 60s with gray hair and glasses, spoke up. "If I may, Patricia, I think Mr. Emerson makes some valid points. The exception clause does seem to cover this type of furniture, and if we're not enforcing similar standards elsewhere, that could be problematic." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Thank you, Robert, but I believe the board's position is clear. Mr. Emerson will receive our formal response shortly." Now, moving on to the next agenda item. I wanted to argue further, but Victoria had warned me not to appear combative or unreasonable. I returned to my seat, feeling the weight of disappointment settle over me. The 10 business days came and went. On the 11th day, I received a letter from the HOA. My hands were shaking as I opened it, hoping for good news. "Dear Mr. Emerson, after careful consideration of your presentation to the board, we have determined that the violation notice stands. The porch swing must be removed within 72 hours, or fines will continue to accrue. Outstanding fines currently total $4,100. Payment arrangements can be made by contacting the HOA office. $4,000. For a porch swing that had done nothing except provide me a place to sit and raid. The injustice of it burned in my chest. I forwarded the letter to Victoria immediately. She called me within an hour. "This is actually good news," she said, which seemed like a strange interpretation. "How is $4,000 in fines good news?" "Because they've now officially rejected your appeal despite clear evidence that they're applying rules inconsistently. That gives us grounds for a lawsuit. We can argue selective enforcement and violation of their own governing documents." Plus, the fines are getting high enough that it makes financial sense to fight this rather than just pay up. What's the next step? I draft a demand letter threatening legal action if they don't rescind the violation and refund any fines. Sometimes that's enough to make them back down. If not, we file suit. The demand letter went out 2 days later via certified mail and email. It was 3 pages of dense legal language that boiled down to: rescind the violation notice and refund the fines, or face a lawsuit for selective enforcement, violation of governing documents, and harassment. Patricia's response came within 24 hours. It was brief. The HOA stands by its decision. We are prepared to defend our actions in court if necessary. Well, Victoria said when I called to tell her, I guess we're going to court. Filing the lawsuit took another week. Victoria prepared a complaint that outlined the entire situation, included all our documentation, and requested several forms of relief: an injunction against enforcement of the violation notice, refund of all fines, attorney's fees, and a declaration that the HOA's actions violated its own governing documents. The day after we filed, something interesting happened. I came home from work to find a woman standing in my front yard, taking photos of my porch. She wasn't trying to hide it, just standing there with a professional-looking camera, snapping pictures from multiple angles. "Can I help you?" I called out as I got out of my truck. She turned, startled. "Oh, hi. I'm just documenting the property for the HOA's legal file. Patricia Whitmore hired me." "Did she give you permission to come onto my property?" The woman's confidence faltered. "Well, she said it was for HOA business." "The HOA doesn't own my front yard. You're trespassing. Please leave." She hurried to her car without another word. I made sure to take photos of her license plate before she drove off. Small victories. The lawsuit moved slowly, as legal proceedings tend to do. We went through discovery, where both sides exchanged documents and information. The HOA provided copies of violation notices issued over the past 2 years, and as I read through them, a pattern emerged. Out of 37 violation notices issued in the past 24 months, 32 had been for minor aesthetic issues: wrong shade of paint, unapproved mailbox design, holiday decorations left up too long. 4 had been for actual maintenance problems like dead trees or broken fences. Mine was the only one classified as a safety concern, and it was the only one that had resulted in ongoing daily fines rather than a grace period for correction. "This is excellent," Victoria told me when we reviewed the documents together. "It shows that their safety concern claim is pretextual. They don't actually enforce safety standards, they enforce aesthetic preferences, and they're treating you differently than other homeowners." "Why, though? What did I do to piss off Patricia?" Victoria shrugged. "With HOA board members, sometimes there's no rational reason. Maybe she doesn't like you. Maybe she's power-hungry and sees you as a challenge to her authority. Maybe someone complained about the swing and she took it personally. Does it matter? I guess not. I just want this to end." We also deposed Patricia and the other board members. I wasn't present for most of the depositions, but Victoria filled me in afterwards. Patricia had been defensive and evasive, particularly when asked about other properties with unapproved modifications. She claimed not to have noticed them, despite walking through the neighborhood regularly. The other board members had been more forthcoming, with 2 of them expressing uncertainty about whether the violation notice had been appropriate. Robert, the board member who'd spoken up during the meeting, testified that he'd voted against the violation notice initially but had been outvoted by Patricia and 2 other members. That was particularly helpful for our case. 6 months into the legal battle, the HOA's attorney reached out to Victoria about settlement. They offered to rescind the violation notice and reduce the fines to $500 if I agreed to drop the lawsuit and sign a non-disparagement agreement. What's a non-disparagement agreement? I asked Victoria when she presented the offer. It means you can't talk publicly about the case or say negative things about the HOA. They want to make this go away quietly. What do you think? She considered for a moment. Financially, it's not a terrible offer. You're into this case for probably $8,000 in legal fees at this point, and it could go higher if we go to trial. But you'd still be out thousands of dollars, and Patricia would still be running the HOA doing the same thing to other people. Then no, I don't want to settle. I want this to go to trial. Victoria grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. The trial was scheduled for 9 months after we filed the initial complaint. It was held in the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix, presiding judge being the Honorable Michael Chen. I took a week off work to attend, though Victoria assured me I'd only need to be present for my own testimony and maybe 1 or 2 other key sessions. The HOA's attorney was a man named David Pritchard, mid-50s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from years of courtroom experience. His opening statement positioned the HOA as reasonable administrators trying to maintain community standards and protect residents from potential harm. Victoria's opening was more direct. This was a case of a power-hungry HOA president selectively enforcing rules to harass a homeowner who'd committed no actual violation. The first few days of trial consisted mostly of expert testimony. The HOA brought in someone they called a safety consultant who testified about the potential dangers of porch swings. Chains could break, hardware could fail, wood could rot, people could fall. On cross-examination, Victoria got him to admit that he'd never actually inspected my swing, and that all his concerns were theoretical and could apply to any piece of outdoor furniture. We brought in a structural engineer who examined the swing, tested its mounting points and verified that it was installed correctly and posed no safety risk. He testified that the swing could easily support the manufacturer's rated weight of 1,000 pounds, probably more. We also brought in several residents from the neighborhood who testified about other modifications they'd made without HOA approval, including the hanging bench and the pergola. None of them had received violation notices. The most dramatic moment came when Patricia herself took the stand. Victoria spent nearly 3 hours questioning her, methodically working through the inconsistencies in enforcement, the lack of documented safety concerns, and the escalating fines. Miss Whitmore, you testified that the porch swing posed a significant safety risk to the community. Can you describe what specific risk you identified? Patricia shifted in her seat. As I said, there was concern about liability if someone were to be injured. But what specific defect or hazard did you identify with Mr. Emerson's swing? I don't need to identify a specific defect. The potential for injury exists. The potential for injury exists with many things. Do you require safety inspections for resident staircases, their bathtubs, their kitchen appliances? That's different. Those are inside the home. What about the fountain feature at 4756 Sage Creek Lane? That's outside. Couldn't someone drown in it? Have you issued a violation notice for that? Patricia's face flushed. I wasn't aware of that fountain. Really? Because according to your own testimony, you walk through the neighborhood at least twice a week. The fountain is 7 feet tall and clearly visible from the street. David Pritchard objected on grounds of argumentative questioning, but the point was made. Victoria moved on to the photos of other properties, getting Patricia to admit that she'd seen several of the modifications but hadn't considered them violations. "So help me understand your standard, Miss Whitmore. A hanging bench is acceptable, but a porch swing is not. A 7-foot fountain is acceptable, but a properly installed swing is not. What's the difference? Each situation is evaluated on its own merits." "By which you mean you decide arbitrarily what you do and don't like." Objection. Pritchard was on his feet. "Withdrawn," Victoria said smoothly. No further questions. My own testimony was less dramatic. I simply walked through the timeline of events, described the swing and its installation, and explained how I'd tried repeatedly to resolve the issue before filing suit. On cross-examination, Pritchard tried to paint me as someone who thought he was above the rules. "Mr. Emerson, did you submit an approval request before installing the swing?" "No, because the governing documents specifically exempt porch furniture from the approval requirement." "That's your interpretation. Did you call the HOA office to clarify before proceeding?" I read the documents carefully. The exception was clear. "But you didn't ask, did you? You just did what you wanted and expected everyone to accept it." I took a breath, keeping my voice level. "I followed the rules as they were written. If the HOA wanted all exterior items to require approval, they should have said so clearly in their documents." The trial lasted a week. Closing arguments were presented on Friday afternoon, and Judge Chen said he'd issue a written decision within 30 days. Those 30 days were agonizing. I tried to go about my normal life, but everything felt suspended. The swing still hung on my porch. I'd refused to take it down through the entire legal process, and it had become something of a symbol. Several neighbors had started walking past my house regularly, giving me thumbs up or words of encouragement. One even brought me cookies. "Whatever happens," one older woman told me, "thank you for standing up to her. Patricia's been a nightmare for years." On day 28, Victoria called. "We got the decision. You're going to want to sit down." My heart hammered as I sank onto my couch. "Just tell me, we won." On every single count. Judge Chen ruled that the HOA violated its own governing documents, engaged in selective enforcement, and imposed fines in bad faith. He's ordering them to rescind the violation notice, refund all fines with interest, and pay your attorney fees. He also issued an injunction preventing them from taking any action regarding the swing. "Frank, this is about as complete a victory as you could hope for." I couldn't speak for a moment. Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. "I can keep the swing. You can keep the swing. And they have to pay for the privilege of trying to take it away from you." The written decision was 18 pages long. I read it 3 times, savoring Judge Chen's methodical dismantling of the HOA's arguments. He was particularly harsh about the selective enforcement, noting that the evidence demonstrates a pattern of arbitrary and capricious decision-making that appears designed to harass Mr. Emerson rather than to serve any legitimate community interest. The HOA had 30 days to appeal, but Victoria didn't think they would. The ruling is pretty airtight, and appeals are expensive. Plus, this decision is now public record. If they appeal and lose again, it just draws more attention to how badly they screwed up. She was right. The 30-day deadline came and went without an appeal. 2 weeks later, I received a check from the HOA for $8,400, covering the fines plus interest. Victoria's firm received a separate check for their fees, which had totaled just over $19,000. I expected that to be the end of it, but the story had one more chapter to play out. About a month after the decision became final, I got a call from Robert, the board member who'd expressed doubts during my original presentation. "Mr. Emerson, I hope you don't mind me calling." I got your number from the community directory. Not at all. What can I do for you? I wanted you to know that there's going to be a special election to recall Patricia from the board. Several of us have been concerned about her leadership for a while, and this lawsuit was the final straw. We have more than enough signatures to trigger the election. Really? That's great news. We're hoping you might consider running for the board yourself. I know that might seem crazy after everything you've been through, but we need people who understand that HOAs should serve homeowners, not harass them. I was silent for a moment, considering. A year ago, I'd never have imagined getting involved in HOA politics. But after everything that had happened, I understood how important it was to have reasonable people in positions of authority. Let me think about it, I told Robert. Can I get back to you in a few days? Of course, no pressure, but I hope you'll consider it. I did think about it. I talked to Victoria, who thought it was a great idea. I talked to my neighbors, several of whom enthusiastically supported the notion. And I thought about Patricia, sitting on the board for probably years to come if someone didn't challenge her. 3 days later, I called Robert back. I'll do it. I'll run for the board. The recall election was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Patricia fought it hard, sending letters to every homeowner in the community arguing that the recall was unfair and that she'd always acted in the community's best interest. But the court decision was public record, and enough people had their own stories of unreasonable HOA enforcement that her support was limited. When election day came, it wasn't even close. Patricia was recalled by a vote of 342 to 89, one of the largest turnouts in Meadowbrook Glen history. I was elected to replace her with 287 votes, running unopposed. My first act as a board member was to propose a complete review of the community's CC and Artiques, with a focus on clarifying rules and ensuring enforcement was consistent and fair. The other board members agreed unanimously. My second act was to propose a formal apology to any homeowners who'd been subjected to unreasonable enforcement actions over the past 5 years, along with a process for reviewing and potentially refunding fines. That one took more discussion, but eventually passed 4-1. The one dissenting vote was from Helen, Patricia's closest ally on the board. She resigned 2 months later, citing philosophical differences with the board's direction. That was 3 years ago now. I'm still on the HOA board, currently serving as vice president. We've made a lot of changes to how Meadowbrook Glen operates. We've clarified the rules, established clear standards for enforcement, and created an appeals process that's actually fair and accessible. We've also instituted term limits for board positions to prevent anyone from accumulating too much power. Patricia moved out of the community about a year after the recall. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was on the HOA board in her new community within 3 months of moving in. Some people never learn. As for me, I'm still in my house on Desert Bloom Drive. The porch swing is still there, hanging from the same sturdy beam where I installed it over 4 years ago. I've replaced the cushions once, and I oil the chains every few months to keep them from squeaking, but otherwise it's exactly as it was. I still sit there most mornings with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the desert. I still spend my evenings there with a book, or just enjoying the breeze. But now, when neighbors walk past, they often stop to chat. Some of them tell me stories about HOA problems they're having in other communities, asking for advice. A few have brought their own disputes to the board, and we've been able to resolve most of them without lawyers or lawsuits. The swing has become something of a neighborhood landmark. New residents always ask about it, having heard the story from others. I tell them the tale, usually in abbreviated form, and I always end with the same point. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's expensive and exhausting and seemingly pointless. Because here's the thing I learned through all of this. HOAs can be valuable when they're run by people who understand that their purpose is to serve the community, not control it. Rules are important for maintaining property values and ensuring everyone can enjoy their homes, but rules without reason or fairness are just tyranny on a small scale. The swing itself has held up beautifully. I've had it inspected twice by professionals, just to be absolutely certain, and both times they've confirmed what I knew all along. It's completely safe, properly installed, and could easily hold the manufacturer's rated weight of 1,000 pounds. I've tested it with groups of friends, squeezing 4 adults onto it at once, and it doesn't even strain. Sometimes I think about how much easier it would have been to just take the swing down when Patricia first demanded it. $800 for the swing, sure, but I could have bought another one and installed it somewhere else. I could have avoided the stress, the legal fees, the time and energy spent fighting. But then, I think about what that would have taught Patricia and people like her, that they can bully people into compliance with unreasonable demands. That property rights don't matter if someone with a little bit of authority decides to flex their power. That it's easier to surrender than to fight for what's right. I think about the other homeowners in Meadowbrook Glen who have benefited from the changes we made after Patricia left. The young couple who wanted to install solar panels and now can without jumping through arbitrary hoops. The family who wanted to build a small playground in their backyard for their kids with special needs. The retired teacher who wanted to paint her shutters a slightly different shade of blue than the approved color palette allowed. All of those people have lives that are a little bit better because I refuse to take down a porch swing. That's not nothing. Last month, I was contacted by a reporter from the Arizona Republic who was doing a story about HOA disputes in the Phoenix area. She'd found the court records from my case and wanted to interview me. The article ran 2 weeks ago, and I've received dozens of emails and calls from people dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I try to help when I can, usually by referring them to Victoria or other attorneys who specialize in HOA law. Sometimes, I just listen and offer encouragement. The most common thing people tell me is that they feel helpless against their HOAs, like there's nothing they can do when faced with unreasonable demands. I always tell them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Sometimes that means hiring an attorney and going to court. Sometimes it means running for the board yourself and changing things from the inside. Sometimes it means organizing your neighbors and pushing for reforms. But it always starts with the decision that you're not going to be bullied, that your rights matter, and that you're willing to fight for them. The swing creaks gently as I rock back and forth, watching another Arizona sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow, I have a board meeting where we'll be discussing a proposal to install new landscaping in the common areas. The week after that, I'm scheduled to speak at a community meeting in a neighboring HOA about best practices for governance. But right now, in this moment, I'm just a man on his porch swing enjoying his property, exercising his rights. It seems like such a simple thing, but I fought hard for this simplicity. And you know what? It was worth every penny, every hour, every moment of stress and frustration. Because this swing, this simple piece of cedar and chain, represents something bigger than itself. It represents the principle that we all have the right to use and enjoy our property in reasonable ways. That rules should serve people, not the other way around. That authority without accountability is tyranny. That sometimes the smallest battles are worth fighting because they're really about the biggest principles. The manufacturer's plate is still bolted to the side of the swing. Rated capacity, 1,000 pounds. I've probably looked at that plate 1,000 times over the past 4 years. It's a reminder that facts matter, that truth matters, that you can't just declare something unsafe because you don't like it or because it challenges your authority. Patricia tried to use safety concerns as a weapon, wrapping her power play in the language of liability and community protection. But in the end, the truth came out. The swing was never unsafe. The only thing at risk was her ego and her control. I hear footsteps on the sidewalk and look up to see my neighbor Tom walking his dog. He waves and changes course to walk up my driveway. "Hey Frank, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" He glances at the swing and grins. "I was thinking about building a pergola over my patio. Wanted to run it by you first since you're on the board now. Make sure I do things right. Come on up, let's talk about it." We spend the next 20 minutes discussing his plans. The pergola he wants to build is covered under the exception clause for outdoor structures under a certain size, so he doesn't need formal approval. But I walk him through the building codes he'll need to follow and suggest he take some photos during construction, just in case. Better safe than sorry, I tell him. Document everything. That's the lesson I learned. After Tom leaves, I sit back on the swing and pull out my phone. There's an email from Victoria with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." Attached is a news article about an HOA in Mesa being sued for selective enforcement of parking rules. The homeowner is using my case as precedent. I forward the article to Robert with a note. The fight continues. He responds within minutes, and we helped arm them for it. Good work. The sun has almost completely set now, just a thin line of gold on the horizon. The neighborhood is quiet except for the occasional sound of a car passing or someone calling their dog inside. It's peaceful, exactly the kind of evening I imagined when I bought this house. I think about how close I came to losing this. Not the physical swing, but the principle it represents. If I'd given in to Patricia's demands, if I'd decided it wasn't worth fighting, she'd still be on the board right now, probably making someone else's life miserable over some other minor perceived violation. Instead, the community is better. The rules are clearer and fairer. People feel like they can actually use and enjoy their properties without fear of arbitrary enforcement. And I get to sit on my porch swing, properly rated for 1,000 pounds, professionally installed, and completely safe, watching the desert sky fade from gold to purple to black. Tomorrow I'll wake up and do it all again. Coffee on the swing at sunrise, work during the day, maybe an evening with a book or friends or just the silence and the stars. It's a simple life, made possible by refusing to accept a simple injustice. The swing rocks gently beneath me, the chains making that soft rhythmic sound I've come to love. Strong, secure, safe. Just like the manufacturer promised, just like the engineer verified, just like I knew all along. Sometimes the smallest things are worth the biggest fights. And sometimes a porch swing rated for 1,000 pounds can carry the weight of something much heavier. The principle that we all deserve to live free from arbitrary authority, that we all have the right to enjoy our homes in peace, and that standing up for yourself, even in small ways, can make the world a little bit better. I rock back and forth, feeling the solid construction beneath me, knowing that this swing will probably outlast my time in this house. Future owners will sit here, maybe never knowing the battle that was fought to protect their right to do so. That's okay. Not every victory needs to be remembered. Some victories just need to exist, quietly proving that reasonable people standing up for reasonable rights will usually prevail over petty tyranny. The swing is that proof, hanging there on my porch, holding up under its rated 1,000 pounds and under the weight of principle. The stars are coming out now, bright against the darkening Arizona sky. I'll sit here a while longer, enjoying the evening, enjoying my home, enjoying the hard-won peace that comes from fighting for what's right and winning. Patricia is gone. The unfair rules are changed. The community is better. And the swing still hangs, exactly where it belongs, exactly where it always should have been allowed to be. That's not just a personal victory. That's justice, small scale but real, proving that sometimes one person standing up can make a difference. I smile in the darkness, listening to the gentle creak of chains and wood, feeling grateful for the stubbornness that made me fight and the principle that made the fight matter. Tomorrow is another day, another sunrise, another opportunity to sit here and remember that some things are worth defending. But tonight, I'm just going to rock back and forth on my 1,000-pound rated porch swing, under my Arizona stars, in my own home that I defended successfully. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.